And now we'd like to welcome everyone in the Pottsville and Lakeville communities and beyond to our virtual church. Our opening hymn this morning is number 403 in our hymnals. So please stand and sing, "Open My Eyes That I May See." So we may follow where you lead us, and our hearts, so we may accept your love. And now with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Psalm 121 is one of my favorite psalms, and I think sometimes it gets overlooked. We hear about the 23rd Psalm, but this one is very special to me too. And I think when I read the story that I'll be sharing with you in a few minutes, it ties in really well to that. So I'll read the regular type, and then you can read the bold. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come?
My help comes from the Lord, who made
He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber.
Behold, he keeps Israel, so neither slumber nor sleep.
The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand.
So you shall strike, and by will by night.
The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life.
The Lord will keep you by night, from coming from the fire and even evermore.
Thank you. And if you know when I've had to fill in for Sandy before, you usually get a story from Guideposts, and this is no exception. I'd like to start out with a thought, though. I wonder how many of us dream that we can do things which we can't do in real life. Anybody besides me? Yeah. When I was young, I used to dream that I could fly. And if you know where I grew up, in the big brick house on the Argyle Road, I would always have to start out the same way. I'd have to run downstairs from my bedroom, through the kitchen, off the front porch, run across the front lawn, and then when I got to the stone wall that surrounds the lawn, I could fly. And it was so easy. I never, it wasn't like Superman. I was only a few feet off the ground, and I never flew farther than my father's field south of Edie Road. But it was fun. And then I would wake up, of course, and realize I couldn't do it. Sometimes I also dream that I am a really good swimmer. And if you have seen me swim, you know that's not true. We have camp on Summit Lake with Jim and Judy, and if I manage to swim to the raft and back, that's good. I'm done for the day. But when I dream about swimming, I'm kind of like a hovercraft. I'm just floating over the water. I barely even get wet. That's how good I am. I'm just not barely even touching the water. So that's why I'm always in awe when I read about someone who can swim for hours or for miles, whether they've challenged themselves to do it or they're forced to do it out of necessity. I just can't understand how it's possible. And we're going to share a story today called Beyond Survival. It's a true story by a man named David Zaharik, and it was originally published in Guideposts in May of 2004. In his case, he didn't have a choice about swimming for a long time. And the story takes place in the Strait of Georgia, which I had to look up because I didn't know where that was. I thought maybe it was near Russia. Turns out it's actually off the coast of British Columbia, Canada, so I was way off there. And it takes place in September. I wondered what the water temperature would be in that location in September, so I looked it up and Googled it, and I found out that it was about 70 degrees. And unless you have a swimming pool, I guess that doesn't mean much. 70 degrees doesn't sound that cold. But I remember last fall when we decided it was time to take the dock out at camp. It was, I think, early October, and somebody checked and said the water temperature was 73 or 74. It only took about half an hour to get the dock out, but everybody was shivering and ready to stand in front of a warm fire at that point and have some hot cocoa, as I remember. So 70 degrees is not warm when you're talking about swimming. So let's keep that in mind as I read Mr. Zaharik's story. I cast a wary sailor's eye at the clearing sky. Thunderstorms had battered the sea around Port Sydney, British Columbia, since early afternoon. Whitecaps frothing like peaks of meringue. Normally, I would have waited out the weather for a day before taking my 36.5-foot boat, Esperance, the 45 miles back to Point Roberts, Washington. I had sailed down here for dinner the night before, but now I was due back at work. I'm a Boeing 767 captain for Air Canada, and I had a schedule to keep. I phoned my wife, Scarlett, from the helm. I said, the wind and rain have calmed down a bit. I'm going to make a run for it. The Weather Bureau says another storm is headed your way, Scarlett warned. I'll be careful, I said, and hung up. I started the engine. I knew I was better off motoring than trying to sail. I steered her out toward the strait which separates the United States from British Columbia. Esperance cut through the water easily, making excellent time. A couple of hours later, by 6:30 p.m., I was halfway home. I set the boat on autopilot at 6 knots and checked the global positioning navigation program that would guide the aspirants right to Point Roberts. I stripped off my survival suit. And this is where it was a movie. You'd have the scary music. He shouldn't be taking off his survival suit. The September evening was growing warm, and I was wearing long johns, a fleece jacket, trousers, and rubber boots. I sat and drank in the scenery. The strait is dotted with uninhabited islands. They looked like clusters of green that gave the appearance that they were floating on the water. But I had work to do. I ducked below deck and stripped in bed and then carried the linens up to the stern so I could monitor the course while I folded the laundry. The boat rocked gently. With my arms full, I spread my legs and braced my left knee against a cable that circles the boat like a handrail and is held in place by simple clasps. I must have forgotten to check the clasps in my haste to set sail. One flew open, and the cable gave way. My knees buckled as I tried to grab hold of something, anything. Laundry scattered, my hands clutched at air, and I plunged backward over the side. I went under the icy water. As I surfaced, gasping for air, I screamed no and lunged for the boat. But she had already moved out of reach, still set on autopilot. Don't panic, I told myself. I tried to get my bearings, but I had lost my glasses when I fell. Blearily, I could detect the dim lights of Point Roberts 7 miles away. But Main Island, the nearest land, was 5 miles. 5 miles. I took a deep breath. September 6th, 2003, I thought. Is this what my death certificate would say? My gravestone? I shook my head as if I could throw off the thought and thought of Scarlett and my family instead. My jacket and boots were pulling me under. I took them off. My stomach was already cramping from the cold. It was too painful to do the crawl. I decided to try the breaststroke instead. I turned toward Main Island and kicked, but I could barely move my legs because my trousers were so waterlogged. Of course, I thought. I remembered an old lifeguard trick. I pulled off my pants, tied each leg into a knot, and then laid the trousers out on the water with the waist facing me. I swept the pants in an arc over my head to fill them with water. Now, I can't imagine doing any of that. You're freezing cold, you have to get your pants off and tie them, wet knot. Anyway, he managed to do it, thank goodness. And then I filled them with water. I cinched the waist. Only one leg was inflated, and when I checked the other, I saw there was a hole at the knee. But that one inflated pant leg gave me just enough buoyancy to keep my head above water. Esperance was almost out of sight now. Would it run aground and alert people to my plight, or would it be too late? Only my right hand was free to swim, but luckily the waves were barely ripples. Every few minutes, I flipped onto my back and reinflated the pant leg. I told myself I had to keep moving. The sun dropped in the sky, and the lights of Main Island showed up. Swimming seemed pointless. Another hour or so, and I knew that my hypothermia would set in, and then it wouldn't matter. Let me not sink. Let me be delivered out of deep waters. The words of Psalm 69 came to me as clearly as when I had heard them in Sunday school and as if I had said them aloud. It was followed by an inner voice that said, "Look around you. Have you ever seen the Georgia Strait so calm?" And it was true. The water was as smooth as I had ever seen it. I took stock. I knew 2 things for sure. God could save me, even in this predicament that seemed hopeless. And no matter what, I couldn't go without a fight. I corkscrewed onto my stomach again and brought my arm through the water. Swim, I told myself. I swam for an hour before stopping, breathless. Not so much out of breath but too tired to breathe. I rolled onto my back. I thought of Scarlett and my son, Alexander, and my daughter, Rachel. Do they know yet, I wondered? A sense of finality came over me. Swim, fight, I told myself. I stroked the water furiously. By now, I had been at it for 2 or maybe 3 hours. I couldn't feel my arms or legs anymore. I imagined what my epitaph would say. David Zaharak, loving husband and father, lousy sailor. I laughed weakly and said to myself, sweet Jesus, I could sure use your help right now. What was that sound in the distance? Waves hitting the shore? Was I hallucinating? Lord, please make it true, I prayed. I forced my limbs to stroke the water. Stroke, kick, stroke, kick. Every last bit of strength. Something massive was ahead of me, as dark as the sky. My hands smacked against something solid. Land, I gasped. And then you think, okay, your struggles are over, but they really are not. I stopped and looked straight up a cliff. I couldn't tell how high it was. I would never make it. I had already spent every bit of strength I had. No, I reminded myself, God can save me, and I'm not going without a fight. I threw my pants over one shoulder, raised one arm out of the water, and felt for a crevice. I had never climbed rock, but I had no choice. I sank my fingers in as deep as they would go. I hauled my body out of the water. I found more handholds, pulled, and then dug my feet into the damp, briny wall of rock. I was making progress, but it was slow. One mistake, and it would be over. All of my struggles for naught. I kept dragging myself upward, rock scraping skin. I shivered violently with the slightest breeze. My fingers were raw and aching. Finally, I reached the crest of the cliff and collapsed. Help was just a few miles away, I thought. Rest, my body told me. But I knew that if I fell asleep out here, I would die. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee. I will deliver thee. This time it was the words of Psalm 50 that I heard in my mind. I tore open the knots that I had tied in my trousers and pulled them on. Then I tried to stand, but my legs were so numb that I slid across the slippery rock. I grabbed at an outcropping and gashed my left palm, but at least I stopped sliding. Get up, I told myself. I tried again to stand, but couldn't, so I crawled over rocks, crevices, and shrubs. It was the only way to go on. There was no moon, no light, and heavy cloud cover turned the night pitch black. I had to feel my way through the brush, and then I came to a precipice. Below me was an inlet, perhaps 100 feet wide. I could hear the sea below. A huge log spanned the inlet, and I reached for it. It was slick with seaweed. I lost my balance and hurtled over the cliff, down, 12 feet, until I was in the cold water again, gasping for air. I swam back to the cliff and scaled it inch by inch. I crawled back to the log, straddled it, and painstakingly pulled my way across. On the other side, the terrain had changed to forest, and beyond that were the lights that I had seen from the sea. I staggered to my feet. A few moments later, I slammed into something. This time it was a 9-foot-high cyclone fence with barbed wire on top. To the left, the fence ran as far as I could see. To the right, it made a 90-degree turn and extended to a rocky precipice that overlooked the sea. I followed the fence to the cliff and looked down at the ocean, which was 80 feet below. It was as if the sea was doing everything it could to claim me. Quickly, I swung out over the abyss and along to the other side of the fence. Up an embankment I went and onto the front porch of a house. No one was home. I went to the next house and the next. By the time I reached the fourth house, I was cold, wet, filthy, and too weak to even call out for help. I rang the doorbell. "Please, God, you brought me this far," I prayed. The door swung open. "Good grief," said the man who opened it. "You must be the fellow they have been looking for." Minutes later, I was in an ambulance. A tanker had spotted the crewless Esperance motoring toward Point Roberts and had alerted the Canadian Coast Guard. Guardsmen boarded my boat and anchored it safely. A search was begun, but no one felt hopeful. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had told my family they would still do everything humanly possible to find me. But it took more than that. From the moment I fell into the water, each time my strength failed, something renewed it. Each time I thought I was done for, something told me, not yet. Not something, someone, who wasn't testing the limits of survival, but who was showing us how he could take me beyond them, drawing me with each stroke, each step, closer to safety and closer to him. So what can we take from this story? I think we've all been in situations, not physically like this where we were threatened, but times when we were overwhelmed with problems or with heartache. And I think it reminds us that we need to reach out to God. And clearly the author recognized this. He said that he knew God was with him for each stroke and each step. God always gave him what he needed, just at the right time. When he thought he was going to drown, God helped him to remember his lifeguard training and the trick about inflating your pants to use as a life preserver. When he was tired and frightened, God reminded him of the words of Psalm 69 and Psalm 50, which encouraged him. God helped him to find strength he never knew he had. He was able to climb a cliff in the dark, even though he'd never climbed one before. He gave him the knowledge to realize that he had to stay awake or he would die of hypothermia even when he just wanted to curl up and go to sleep. God gave him the courage and perseverance to cross a precipice by crawling along a log not once, but twice, and to find a way around a 9-foot fence which he knew he would not be able to scale. And then God gave him the strength to make his way to a road where there were homes and potential aid. And finally, God placed someone at home that night who could help him. Just like the author, we can also trust that no matter what trouble we face, God is with us. Even if we didn't realize it at the time, as we look back on our lives, we can see how in times of trouble, God knew what we needed and provided it for us. He always wants to do that for us. We just have to acknowledge our need for help. And now, if I have things correctly, I think it's time for our song.
Your offering.
Oh, see, I did forget. Sorry. Will the ushers please bring forth the offering? I knew I'd forget something. Please help us to use these gifts which are returning to you in a way that will make you happy so that we can continue to do your work in this world. Amen. And now please join with me. I thought it'd be nice to read the benediction together. And that is number... What is it? 322. 322. Thank you. Number 322. Let's stand and read that in unison. May the Lord, mighty God, bless and keep you forever. Grant you peace, perfect peace, courage in every endeavor. Lift up your eyes and see his face and his grace forever. May the Lord, mighty God, bless and keep you forever. Go in peace.